All righty. Well, I think I'll get started. Respect everyone's time tonight. We got a packed hour-long agenda, so no time to waste. If you're still filing in, welcome. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on this wet, rainy evening. Perfect time to cozy up to your computer screen, learn about living shorelines and coastal dunes specifically. My name is Mitch Silverstein, and I am Surfrider Foundation's San Diego County Policy Manager. If you're new to Surfrider, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's ocean, waves, and beaches for all people through a powerful activist network. Our San Diego County chapter is the largest in the network with over 4,000 local members, 4 full-time staff, and 8 volunteer-led programs. If you're interested in getting involved, becoming a member, or both, please visit our website at surfridersd.org, where you can find lots of helpful information. Moving on to the reason why we're here tonight. Beach preservation and coastal access are core to Surfrider's mission. We put in a lot of effort to ensure our beaches are accessible, including keeping tabs on coastal development and coastal management to ensure that we all continue to have a beach to access in the first place. We're also gearing up to offer more hands-on opportunities to contribute to beach and wetland restoration as well. So stay tuned for more opportunities on that. Now, I know firsthand that coastal policy is quite technical and often intimidating. Therefore, one of our goals is to provide opportunities for ocean and beach lovers like you to learn more about our coastal environment, including beach processes and how our coast is managed. An informed beach-going public is a cornerstone of ensuring our beaches and coast are properly protected for all people. Seeing such a great turnout tonight and at several educational beach walks we hosted last year really tells me that San Diegans really care about the beach, want to learn more about this special place we all love, and of course, want to learn how to protect it. So without further delay, let's learn about living shorelines and specifically how coastal dune restoration can benefit our shoreline. We've got 4 expert speakers lined up for you. Each will present for roughly 10 minutes. After that, we'll use the rest of our time for questions. If you do have a question, you can send it to us via the chat at any time during the presentation. You can also raise your hand once we move into the question period, and I'll ask you to unmute. Please let us know who you'd like to answer your question to. Otherwise, I'll just do my best to direct it to the most appropriate among us. And then lastly, due to time constraints and the number of attendees, we may not have time to answer every question, but we will do our best. And please keep all questions respectful and on topic. That being said, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker tonight, Alex Ferron, and let me get the presentations queued up.
Well, thank you, Mitch. While you do that, I'm going to keep time moving. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Ferron. Super excited to be here. Really awesome roster of folks talking. I'm Surfrider's Living Shorelines Coordinator, and I focus on community-driven coastal adaptation, essentially putting communities in the driver's seat for planning for what the future holds. And to jump right in, because we don't have a lot of time, I am going to jump on. So next slide. Here is the problem we face. We have a very dynamic coastline. The coasts are essentially subject to change, always have been, always will be. And that runs into conflict where it meets our non-dynamic things such as roads or houses or buildings. And that's a real tough spot to be in with one very dynamic thing and one very not dynamic thing. This is not a picture of San Diego, but next slide, you see that this is also a problem here. Our king tide seasons give us a little window into the future of what San Diego will look like with just a little bit more sea level rise. And sea level rise aside, we see the impacts of coastal erosion on a dynamic beach with non-dynamic structures like homes, and the challenges of that are growing every day. So how do we stop the ocean from taking the stuff that we love, right? Next slide. Here are a couple protection tactics that we work through. First, resist. That's pushing back against the ocean quite literally. You can see here in this picture a line of rock wall. We call it revetment, riprap, might be a seawall, but essentially putting up something solid to stop the ocean. The pro, this does provide some immediate protection, which is awesome because it buys time. The cons, not so awesome. We know that seawalls fixing the beach causes beach loss. It's expensive, and unfortunately, it is not a long-term solution, and eventually it will fail. Tactic number 2, accommodate. This could look like putting houses on stilts. We see that more on the East Coast than out here in California. But it could also look like something like a living shoreline, essentially reinvesting in dunes or wetlands, something that still provides some buffer from the ocean, but also provides the co-benefits of, as you can see here in this picture, towel space and habitat while protecting. The cons to this, it is not an end-all solution. Eventually, some other action will have to be taken. Tactic number 3, removing the threat altogether. This is the only true long-term solution. This can look like physically moving houses away from the threat, which in this case is the ocean. This can look like buying out. This can look like land swaps, a whole lot of different options. But the con is that it is absolutely, without a doubt, the hardest to implement. And if you would click one more time, there is a secret tactic number 4, and that is avoid. Avoid building in vulnerable locations altogether, but that's kind of a tough one when you're already developed. So next slide, please. I am here to talk to you today about one method using nature-based solutions and really looking at one project in specific to show how that can be really successful when coupled with a handful of different modalities, whether that be accommodation or removal of the threat. So there's no tried and true definition for nature-based solution. Unfortunately, it's kind of like the word natural. It gets tacked on to a lot of things to make it seem awesome. But essentially, here is how I determine if something is a living shoreline. Essentially, we are solving environmental challenges by harnessing nature, by mimicking processes that already exist on the beach and using those to promote a resilient coastline, as opposed to fighting against nature. So next slide, we're going to see that in action. Surfers Point, Ventura, California. You may have heard of it. You may have surfed it. Fun fact, it is the only place I have ever successfully nose-ridden, and probably will be the only place I've ever successfully nose-ridden. But this is an amazing beach, really cool wave, really cool public space. As you can see here, it underwent quite an incredible transformation. Next slide. Just starting off with Surfers Point's story. Back in 1989, the city of Ventura said, "Dear public, we love you so much. We're going to build you this amazing public use infrastructure." When I say that, it's essentially parking lot for people to be able to show up and access the beach, bike lanes so people can enjoy the coastline. Amazing. Pedestrian walkways. We love it. Unfortunately, and you may notice from this picture, a little tell, but it was built incredibly close to the shoreline. And next slide, only 10 years later, you see that it has become already incredibly damaged. So only 10 years after this infrastructure was built, the ocean had already started taking it back because, again, it was built so closely to the shoreline. You see a couple different tactics being deployed here, some armoring, but essentially what you see is
Hey,
now,
Alex,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt and get you off your game. I got a couple messages that people don't see the slides.
Oh no.
Yeah, so just
Okay. Actually, that might be a user thing. If you go up to the very right-hand corner and click View, try clicking side by side gallery, speaker, multi-speaker, and that should show up your slides for you.
okay. Yeah, it looks like most people see them. So just to
Okay.
the few of you that messaged, try that, and hopefully you can see them. And sorry to interrupt, just want to make sure everyone can see these awesome photos.
No worries, but I'm taking my 30 seconds of time back.
You take it, yeah.
So
Apparently
like
there's a tab at the top for some people that
Yes.
says
Yeah.
Mitch Silverstein's screen. So if you click that, you'll see the slides.
All
Okay,
right.
thanks
Hopefully
everyone who
people
messaged.
are back on, but if you can see this, what you're looking at is essentially a really awesome piece of public use infrastructure that has been rendered completely unusable. Next slide. 20 years later, so only 20 years after this was whole thing was built, the beach is basically completely unusable. I say basically because people will still wade through the rubble, but this is a really hazardous space, right? We've got rebar sticking up everywhere, concrete just washing back and forth in the surf. This is both unusable and it's a habitat that's completely destroyed. So it certainly serves no purpose for anyone, really. Next slide, please. So the community said what to do about this. We want a beach, we want to be able to use it. This is an amazing spot. So some coastal engineers, some environmentalists, and some surfers all got together and put together what was then a pretty radical plan, the concept of a living shoreline. Living shorelines aren't new. They are essentially just what's there before we develop it. This is a method that's used a lot on the East Coast or Gulf states, and that can look more like salt marshes or mangroves or oyster beds. But here on the Pacific side, no one was really sure if you could build a living shoreline and it could withstand the strong energy waves of the Pacific Ocean. So the idea here, you get the high level picture, but was essentially to re-engineer what was already there, what was already once before it was developed and paradise was paved over with a parking lot, but rebuild and reinvest in these dunes. So next slide, the project, pretty simple, but kind of funky. What they did was essentially remove all of that ruined infrastructure, excavate down to what would have been the base or the foundation of this dune before it was just filled with fill dirt. They reseeded that with the native cobble that would have been there. And then they blasted it full of sand, put sand on top of it, and then seeded native plants. And this essentially created an amazing layer cake. Again, what would have been there, where from the native cobble providing foundation at the base, all the way to the native plants, that location native specific plants are amazing in that they have evolved with those spots to provide exactly what that area needs, whether it be the animals or, in this case, amazing, strong, long roots that provide this almost rubber band-like system to hold the dune in place and also provide this little sand catch feature at the top with their actual plantiness. But what you got in the end, next slide, is an absolutely incredible restored area. So with this, there was no loss of parking. There was only enhancement. So you can see the top half of this image, and this is actually kind of cool because this project was done in 2 phases. And this picture, the top half is the finished phase. You can see amazing parking, bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, habitat, towel space up the wazoo. This just, it has it all, where it once was completely unusable and just a hazardous minefield of rubble. And the bottom half shows you exactly what that looked like before this was restored. Again, just a cliff of asphalt with rebar, just asking you to try it and see if you got your tetanus recently enough. But this just couldn't be more telling of the story of what something could be in both directions if we adapt and plan for change and invest in the processes that already exist on the coastline to provide resilience, or we don't. So next slide, talking about resilience really quickly. The concern was, will this last? This was Surfers Point after January 2023, our big Friday enormous swell that came through. You can see a bunch of cobble being exposed there. Ooh, it's a little concerning, right? The sand's gone from there. But next slide, in February, just a month later, way before sand usually starts to regather back on a beach, you can see sand building back up on that beach. And Mitch, if you want to just click back and forth for just a couple times, it's really impressive to see how quickly that sand came back to a beach that, again, in winter, where we don't really see that happen yet, just the ability to have that foundation of the cobble, of the plants, provides that resilience for a beach to be able to build itself back up. So next and final slide, want to leave you with, again, just that beautiful image of what could be in both directions if we invest in what, you know, nature's figured out to work for both ourselves and itself, or if we fight against it, 2 very different outcomes. So thank you so much. That is my time and then some.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, we are now going to pass the mic to Jenna, who's going to give us some background on California dunes. Let me get you queued up here, Jenna. And whenever you are ready.
Great. Can everyone hear me? I can't actually see anyone, but Mitch, just let me know if no one can hear me.
I can hear you, so everyone can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Jenna Wisniewski, and I'm a Coastal Resilience Research Associate and Coordinator of the California Dunes Science Network at California Sea Grant, based out of usually sunny La Jolla, California, although I know it's not so sunny today for all of us. Today, I'll be touching on dunes, both historical and current, as nature-based solutions along our California coastline. Next slide, please. So, as I'm sure you are all aware, we've seen a huge impact to our beaches from storm and wave events, especially in our previous 2 winters. Here are examples from Malibu, Santa Barbara, and San Diego taken at king tide events. Although these events show the most extreme tides, like Alex mentioned, they are a great snapshot to understand how the coast will look during increased storm and sea level rise events in the future. The state recognizes the need for viable nature-based adaptation strategies. Next slide, please. So as you'll see from all the great presentations tonight, nature-based solutions are a great option to enhance the resilience of our coastline while allowing natural processes and continued natural habitat for coastal species. Here's just a nice little diagram you can see of something with a hard retaining wall versus more of the flow of a living shoreline. Next slide, please. So not only are dunes a hugely important resource, both ecologically and recreationally, they have the potential to buffer and enhance beaches and adjacent land to climate impacts. They can also work to preserve culturally important landscapes and resources. Next slide. So we see a need for increased dune science and collaboration across the state. The California Dune Science Network, or CDSN, is a collaborative network started in 2019. So now we have over 300 members. I'm looking for that 400, but we'll get to that at the end. These can include educators, dune practitioners, scientists, and general dune enthusiasts, as we like to call them. This network collects monitoring data, restoration techniques, and best management practices. It also acts as a resource hub for coastal dune science in order to facilitate more restoration and protection in the future. Next slide, please. So here are a few examples of projects that are network highlights. One thing that will stand out for you for dune projects as a whole is there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So there are many different restoration goals and techniques to utilize dunes as nature-based solutions. For example, if you look at Santa Monica Beach in that center, this is a test site to determine the feasibility of dune sites on groomed, highly populated beach. And if you've been to Santa Monica, you know that it truly is highly populated. This project utilizes sand fencing and the planting of native vegetation, compared to Point Reyes National Seashore, where managers are looking to restore the natural coastline and enhance resilience, as well as provide protection for native species. This utilized machinery, herbicide treatment, and invasives removal. In recent years, there have been many dune restoration projects like these. You've probably heard of them across the state. However, it is important to note that dunes are not a new idea for California. Large portions of the California coast were historically dunes. Next slide, please. So here we have Manhattan Beach dunes in 1920 and an 1880 snapshot of San Francisco, which you may recognize in present day as Golden Gate State Park. A large percentage of these dunes have been lost to development. So it's important to the CDSN to understand just how our coastlines have changed and what we can do to increase resilience of these dunes that we are losing. Next slide, please. So this led to the network's Climate Action Seed Fund grant project, always a tongue twister, but we have 3 main objectives for the project. The first is to create a statewide dune inventory. The second will be to use field observations to monitor and assess the response of dunes at 29 coastal sites. And lastly, we will develop restoration frameworks for using dunes as nature-based solutions in the future. Next slide, please. So our lovely monitoring team, this project utilizes drone imagery, RTK monitoring, and transect work to record a ton of seasonal changes, including dune features, vegetation, sand grain analysis, and ecological data at 29 monitoring sites. And Surfers Point that Alex just presented is one of our monitoring sites as well. As of 2025, we have conducted around 50 surveys, and I know the team is gearing up for more in the spring. Next slide, please. So our dune inventory, this is something we're all super excited about, as there's not currently a comprehensive map of all of California's coastal dunes. This inventory will seek to establish a baseline of present attributes, including dune position for the entire California coast, vegetation, and critical habitat, as well as detailed attributes from pilot site monitoring like beach dune height and volume. Here's an example of a machine learning tool called Hamel we've been using to map the dune crust along the entire California coast using satellite-derived images. Next slide, please. So we are also seeking to map the historical extent of dunes over time, which also has not been mapped before, using historical topographic maps or T-sheets to see how dunes have changed over time. And excuse me, it has been mapped before, but only as physical T-sheets, so we are digitizing this entire thing. We have completed all of this historical mapping and are almost done with our current. We do have some preliminary results to show. Next slide. So since the 1850s, Southern California has lost approximately 95% of its dunes, with 106 kilometers squared lost due to urban development. Highly populated areas in Central California, such as San Francisco, have similarly lost extensive areas of dunes. So this map that you see on the right-hand side of your screen is actually a snapshot map of San Francisco. That pink shadow that you see is the historical dune extent, and the small orange sliver to the left is current dune extent. San Francisco has lost 99% of their dunes due to development. Northern California has experienced less significant loss, around 9%, as coastal development has been relatively limited, although the introduction of invasive species like the ice plant you see on a lot of our dunes has negatively impacted many of these systems. Next slide, please. So it's not all bad. We are seeing growth of many dunes, especially in protected dune fields like this one at 10 Mile Dune Preserve in Mendocino. So at this preserve, we've seen overall growth, that's in green on this map, at the landward edge of the dune, with some loss in red along the coast and in developed areas. We need to understand how to preserve these important areas, restore degraded ones, and choose site placement for new ones, which leads us to our restoration frameworks. Next slide, please. So tying all of this inventory work together, as well as those seasonal field observations at our monitoring sites and restoration feedback from managers and the community, we are looking to create a set of restoration frameworks that will act as a roadmap for effective restoration methods and top site placement for future dunes, all ultimately working to protect California's coastal dunes that work to protect us and our vulnerable coastlines. Next slide, please. So thank you so much. Hopefully a lot of you were already dune enthusiasts, but we've made some more today. If you're interested in our work or would like to hear more about dunes across the state and how you can support, we invite you to become a dune enthusiast. This is a QR code just for our website. You should find a little button to click to sign up on there. I swear I don't send out very much as a network. It's usually just a quarterly newsletter. And also feel free to send me any questions or comments on the specific dune project or the network, and that is my email up on the screen. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jenna. And just everyone, if you're scrambling to write or take pictures of this, I'm sure I'll be able to share that link in your email as well on a follow-up as well. All right, let's find Carrie.
Hello.
Hey, all right. Our next presenter, Carrie Benner, is going to take it local to South Ponto. So let me get you queued up here.
All right, thanks, Mitch, and thanks everyone for joining tonight. My name is Carrie Benner. I'm an environmental scientist with State Parks. I work for the San Diego Coast District, and we help manage around 25% of the coastline from Carlsbad State Beach down south to the border at Borderfield State Park. And so I'm talking tonight about our coastal dune restoration. But you can stay on that slide, Mitch, that's fine. I like more time to brag about our project partners anyway. So I'm talking about our restoration site at Ponto, and this project would not have happened without these partners. So I wanted to acknowledge them right off the bat. Carolyn Lieberman with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Coastal Program provided project support and funding that was crucial for getting this project going. Also crucial were our two consultants on the project, Freddie Scarelli, who is now with ESA, and James Peeler with Coastal Environments. All three of these folks are on the call tonight and can help answer questions about the project if they come up. We've also had a pretty big crew at State Parks led by my supervisor, Darren Smith, to help get this project going. Next slide, please. So just a bit about the project in case you haven't been to this beach. South Ponto is part of South Carlsbad State Beach. It's the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay and Luiseño tribes. It's a very popular beach adjacent to Carlsbad Boulevard. It's bisected by those jetties at Bataquitas Lagoon. And there's also a pretty prominent cobble berm that you can see in this satellite image on the left. That kind of dark band going along the water line is a cobble berm. And this project really started when Freddie noticed that sand was basically blowing from the beach across Carlsbad Boulevard onto the median there and trying to kind of form dunes off of the beach. And so he proposed the project to Carolyn with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to try to test out different techniques for keeping that sand on the beach, building out dune habitat, similar to a project that they've been involved with down at Borderfield that Jenna highlighted earlier. So this project aligned well with State Parks goals. If you go to the next slide, please. If you look at historic photos in the California Coastal Records Project, you can see that there were previously vegetated coastal dunes in this area. And then due to development and further use of the beach, these dunes had disappeared as shown in that 2013 photo. And then spoiler alert, our project just helped restore some of that habitat that had been lost due to development. Next slide, please. So the overall goals of the project are listed here. We wanted to restore the coastal dune habitat, reduce sand movement off the beach and help keep that sand on the beach, increase resiliency of Carlsbad Boulevard to flooding and sea level rise, increase community awareness about coastal habitat and living shorelines, which Surfrider is thankfully helping us do tonight, and then evaluate effectiveness through monitoring. Next slide, please. And the main idea behind this project is to use biomimicry, which is just replicating something that's naturally done by plants or animals. So when dune vegetation is established, it helps trap and accumulate sand as that sand is blown across the beach by the wind. You can see in this photo on the left on what is, predominantly cobble and sand mixture beach, this plant is helping trap that sand as it's moving across the beach, helping form the start of a dune. And on the right is just another neat picture just showing how these plants are altering that pattern of the sand by helping trap that sand with their leaves. Next slide, please. So this project was really an experiment to test how we could use different techniques to mimic that process and build these dunes in the absence of that vegetation. So we made sure to maintain public access throughout, but we basically designed it so that the plots had either sand fencing or shims or a combination of both so that those could start accumulating sand. We basically lift those shims as the sand accumulates and as those dunes build. We also added native dune plant seeds, as well as discarded vegetation from Bataquitas Lagoon. So we really benefited from location here. California Fish and Wildlife actually clears out native dune plants about every year to help make room for these really essential least turn nesting sites. And so as they clear out that vegetation, we are able to use it and kind of scatter it throughout our dune plots, knowing that the vegetation will help capture sand, even if it's not established, and B, will have seeds within that discarded vegetation, and those seeds can then help establish some plants within our plots. Next slide, please. Gonna work. If you click once more, I took a video. I'm not sure if it'll work. Nope. Okay. Well, I took a video on Tuesday just to show the sand moving across our site, just to see these shims and plants in action, but it's okay. We can move on. Just to really show, like, you know, every day these shims are capturing sand. So it's pretty cool to see if you go out to that site. These are some drone images of our monitoring results. So far, we've seen pretty substantial gains in both dune height and vegetation growth. So Freddie and James have been taking drone images and analyzing them to see how the elevation has changed. And I wanted to include these photos just to show, you know, in May, you can kind of see those yellow flowers from the beach evening primrose in this photo. It's really beautiful to see them grow. And in November, the shadows are really showing that the growth in height that's occurring at these dune plots. Next slide, please. And so here, getting a little bit more technical, are the results if you take a cross section of that same plot. So on the left side of this graph is the ocean side of the dunes. On the right side is closer to Carlsbad Boulevard. The red line is from before the project, and the bright green line is right when the project was installed. If any of our attendees are colorblind tonight, it's the two mostly flat lines that don't show any variation along the bottom. So those are kind of our pre-project lines. The dark blue is from November 2023. Bright blue is from May of last year, and then black is from November of last year. So you can see pretty cool variation in topography, and then obviously there's been a substantial growth in elevation among these dunes. Next slide, please. And I wanted to show this one just to show the variation that we get. Same results, basically going from pre-project to post. We've seen some growth in 2023, which is that dark blue line. And then last year is the black and the bright blue lines that show even more growth. So it's pretty exciting to see. Next slide, please. So we also surveyed the plants within the plots. We did twice a year surveys. We got really lucky with high precipitation in 2023 and 2024. We didn't have any irrigation of the plots. We just kind of let nature do its thing, and we really lucked out. It was great to see. You can see there's a noticeable jump between November 2023 and May 2024. And this plot was just comparing the difference between the different experimental treatments. So what does it look like with the vegetation in the fence plots? How about the fence and shims plots? And how about the plots with only shims? And what we're generally noticing is that the plants seem to like the shims. They seem to be pretty successful in establishing and spreading when there are shims in those plots rather than just fence alone. Next slide, please. And then we also saw an interesting difference at the different locations of these dune plots. So north of the jetties is shown in the center of this plot. And so that has seen less vegetation cover. And we assume that this is because there's more sand accumulation in the north. There's more sand available. We're seeing more growth in height of those plots. And that's kind of, as the sand is burying the vegetation, we're getting less vegetation cover compared to south of the jetties. So just some interesting patterns emerging as we're experimenting and seeing how this project goes. Next slide, please. So given this success, we added 2 more plots just in December. We filled in our control plots. We're kind of past the scientific monitoring phase, and we kind of just want to focus on let's get more dunes on the beach. Let's keep more sand on the beach. Let's let these plants grow and do their thing. So we're pretty excited about it. We've gotten some really good feedback from the public whenever I go. People thank me. So people are pretty excited to see the plants on the beach. The flowers are beautiful, and anything that we can do to help keep sand on the beach seems to be a fan favorite here at Ponto. So we're looking forward to continuing this project. Next slide. Oh, that's it. So thank you all for having us. Again, my whole team is here for questions, and we appreciate you having us tonight. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carrie. See some really interesting questions in the chat that we'll get to. Jayme, we're going to pass it to you if you're able to unmute. Let me just give me 1 sec. I got to switch my screen share here. So hang tight, everybody.
No problem. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
Just got to queue up your slides. All right. Is that looking good for everyone?
Looks great.
Awesome. All right.
Okay.
You're good to go.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Jayme Timberlake. I'm the Coastal Zone Administrator for the City of Oceanside. And I'm giving you an update on our North Oceanside Coastal Dune Restoration Pilot Project. This pilot project is concentrated on the north end of Oceanside. And if you've been to Oceanside, you might be scratching your head a little bit because where Oceanside really suffers with coastal resilience, it's in areas south of the pier. But we are concentrating this particular pilot project on northern areas that have dry sand beaches currently, which is to say that these beaches have sustained natural resources that we can work with to do a true nature-based solution for coastal protection. So having said that, this is a very proactive coastal resilience adaptation project that we're hoping to install before we have those eroded conditions like we see in South Oceanside or like we're experienced in Ventura at Surfrider Beach. Next slide. So I'm kind of going to run through, similarly, I'm going to run through a couple of the state of affairs of Oceanside's beaches currently. So, we have a consistent beach sand source issue. Our coastline's almost been entirely cut off from a natural sand source by the building of Camp Pendleton and the boat basin there in 1942. So when that boat basin was built, it cut off a huge natural sand source. So our beach sand really needs to be manually put back on the beach. And sand in Oceanside has been largely sustained by either retention by the South Jetty at Harbor Beach or by annual disposal of sand from the Harbor Channel dredging. So the dunes, like I said, are being proposed in these areas where we have the sustained sand, which will help us retain some of that sand and make our beach nourishment efforts last even longer. Oceanside's beaches are already heavily vulnerable to existing storm events because we have low-lying development in areas that were once beaches. And this is like already diminishing the likelihood that a narrow sandy beach can lessen flooding. Additionally, as we were just discussing, when we lose beaches, we lose an entire ecological ecosystem. And then finally, when we lose sand from a beach for good, we lose recreational space and we concentrate all the benefits that beaches provide into smaller and smaller spaces, which puts a lot of competing needs and uses into one small area. So I think I could probably speak for the whole panel today and recognize that dunes are not a panacea solution to all of our beach problems, but they are certainly one tool that we can utilize to improve our coastal resilience and try and keep the sand on our beaches. Next slide. So we also received a grant for our work doing this pilot restoration project from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you to them. And since receiving the grant, the Dune project team and I have been developing the design and conducting public outreach and performing a siting analysis on where we expect the dunes to thrive and to provide the expected benefits of flood protection, sand management, habitat expansion, and doing all these things while limiting a disruption to recreation and existing uses of the beach. So this is a pilot project, and so the installed project needs to showcase the benefits on a small scale to prove to the community and to decision makers that a small investment in sustaining dunes can assist with resilience on the coast with nominal compromises. The three areas that we settled on for doing our dune restoration project is Harbor Beach, the San Luis Rey River mouth, and North Strand Beach. And these are all indicated here with the red arrows. So the overall project goal here is to restore approximately 1 acre of coastal dune habitat in North Oceanside, and then prove that these dunes can work locally as a tool for coastal management. Next slide, please. So moving on to the specifics of siting the dunes, Harbor Beach sustains a very wide beach, over 500 feet in some locations, which means there's an abundance of dry sand blowing around, and there's also an abundance of recreational space to share. But at the north end, the North Jetty parking lot used for accessing the beach, it does flood often, sometimes once a year, and it's expected to flood more frequently in the next 5 years per Cosmos flood projections. So there are also significant sand management issues here, and lately we've been abating those sand management problems with a plastic K-rail across the parking lot, and you can see that on the right side, the right photo on the right side. So we expect dunes to capture some of this blown sand and grow in height and lessen the need for public works to continually maintain the lot and the sidewalks, and then also diminish the flood potential for this heavily utilized beach space and parking lot. Next slide. So here's North Strand Beach today. There are persistent sand management needs along this stretch, and this area is low-lying and floods often during high wave events. If you want to click the photo on the right, there's a little video of flooding happening in March 2016. So you can see from the flooding that it's occurring slowly without a whole lot of energy behind it. And though this storm was intense offshore, the energy was low. So once it hit the back beach, it kind of sheet flowed across the flat beach. And we think that this flooding could be curbed by a dune. Next slide. Oops. So, and then finally, the San Luis Rey River mouth. This area suffers from legal and illegal vehicular traffic, which is trampling the dunes that are already trying to grow here. And so that's why we targeted this area for a dune restoration project. And so the effort here will be to curb the traffic to permit the dunes to grow and then provide habitat. Slide. Thanks. So our overall goal for the dune restoration project is to mitigate some of these issues along the North Oceanside coastline and then prove the efficacy of dunes as a coastal management tool for our coastline. From a long-term perspective, a major goal of the project is to retain sand on the beach, just like Carrie was saying. Dunes act as a natural sand storage on the back beach. You could think of them as winter storm berms, like is done in San Clemente, San Diego. They do a pretty huge berm in Carpinteria. But these dunes, when they're done with vegetation and they're done with sand fencing, they can rebuild themselves with enough sand and with minimal management. So other benefits of the dunes and goals on this project are to elevate the back beach and lessen flood potential, restore a rare habitat that was once prevalent throughout all of Oceanside's coastline, giving people an opportunity to learn about sea level rise and ecological and cultural importance of dunes. And then, of course, if we can prove that natural infrastructure works, then that lessens the likelihood that we would turn to hard infrastructure for coastal protection. Next slide. So this is the current proposed design for Harbor Beach dunes. The main goal for Harbor Dunes will be to create 0.5 acre of dunes, leaving 18.5 acres of remaining dry sand beach areas for other activities. In addition to lessening flood potential and assisting in sand management, beach access is going to be improved by the project happening here at North Jetty parking lot. We plan to remove some of those rock riprap from the beach fronting the parking lot, and that will allow the dunes to provide the coastal protection that the rocks were providing. The removal of the rock will allow people to pass easily from the lot to the beach. And then, of course, we'll be removing that plastic K-rail. Next slide. So for Harbor Beach and North Strand, we're using the lessons learned from Ponto, and we're doing a real similar installation of our dunes. So the installation will be simple, copy the techniques used at Ponto, and we'll begin by digging in and installing exclusionary sand fencing that will sit about 3 feet above the sand. The sand fence will be oriented perpendicular to the wind, providing an obstacle that reduces the wind speed and making the sand that's picked up by the wind get dropped behind the fence slats. And plants also diminish local wind speed, so we'll likely be growing out some of these plants and or grabbing some from harvesting some from Pataquitos as well. And then we'll be dispersing some of the seed that we collected a couple falls ago. Sand fences are expected to eventually be removed once the mounding of the dunes occurs and plants become more established. Next slide. Thanks. So we had a plan to do North Strand dunes in front of Roberts Cottages, restoring about 0.07 acres or 3,000 square feet of dunes using these same techniques. The city's adaptation plan states plainly that structures along North Strand that are at grade, like Roberts Cottages, are expected to be flooded by daily high tides by 2040, which is why we targeted this area for our pilot dune project. If you want to just click the next slide, it'll just show what's happened. So though we targeted outreach to Roberts Cottages, it did result in several letters sent to the city council opposing the dunes, citing view obstructions, dune aesthetics, and impediments to recreational use. So the dunes in front of Roberts Cottages are no longer proposed, and the project team is now trying to determine where else we could install dunes along North Strand. Next slide. So we are trying to find an optimum location where the dunes can grow on North Strand and showcase their benefits. The siting for the next dunes will continue to be guided by sea level rise modeling, flood maps, and outreach. Building a better understanding and base of knowledge about what Oceanside's coastline will be like in the future if we do nothing, we think will help enable the city to continue to proactively address sea level rise through these kinds of adaptation projects. And so, that's really why participating in this kind of webinar is really important. We at the city don't just want to be reactive to sea level rise, but when folks don't see and really feel that there is a problem, it's real difficult to convince people to compromise their current situations. Next slide. So, and then lastly, the San Luis Rey proposed dune restoration is the most passive of all the restoration efforts. The dunes being restored at the mouth of the Rey will occur merely through light maintenance and the prevention of trampling. And the dunes will be especially interesting to monitor at San Luis Rey since they're likely to provide the most habitat benefits, and then they'll have plenty of space to migrate naturally when they're protected. And next slide. And so thank you very much. I'm available for questions, and I'll leave you with this photo of North Strand from 1929.
Thank you, Jayme. Great photo there showing some historic dune habitat in Oceanside. I'm going to stop the share and we're going to move into the question period. Got some questions. I'm going to start with the chat, and then Joanna, if you don't mind maybe monitoring anyone who's here still who has a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to you as soon as we can in order and ask you to unmute. And I just want to remind everyone to keep the questions on topic and respectful. And yeah, so I'm going to start with a couple that through the chat that came through that I think are good. Starting with a question for you, Alex, from Charlie. Surfers Point, sand source, whose project, city, county, or question mark, funding source, question mark. So Charlie's curious about some of the behind the scenes.
I'm going to maybe do a little dirty answering this. James from ESA is on this call, and this is their project. So I don't know if James can be unmuted and share a little bit of that. I think
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's unmute our friends from ESA and from Fish and
But while you're
Wildlife.
doing that, I can say a lot of the funding came from the Coastal Conservancy, which is an amazing funder who's really putting a lot of dollars behind a lot of coastal resilience efforts in the whole state.
Hello, this is James. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so for Ponto, it was money from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Cal State Parks. That's where our funding came from. And these projects, they're not that expensive. You know, with Dune, the shims and the fencing, neither of which are all that expensive.
So James, this question was actually for Surfers Point, which much bigger project, a lot
Oh, yes, I'm not involved with that.
Oh, different James at ESA. Gotcha. Well, I can speak a little bit to that. Some of the material, gosh, was it Carrie or Jenna? It was talking about one of the projects here locally that benefits from some local sediment, and that's very similar to like the Cardiff Living Shoreline. Surfers Point has an amazing natural native source of cobble right up the stream at Ventura River. That's actually kind of the bigger project to restore that whole stream, remove a dam to get sediment moving back down. As far as sand sourcing for the actual first initial dump, I couldn't tell you, but they haven't had to provide more sand since. All of that has just been naturally accreted since the build out. And funding, like I said, that was joined with City of Ventura, I believe the county, I believe the fairgrounds, maybe, but I would look at maybe the project website, look at Surfers Point online to find out more. But the Coastal Conservancy provided a lot for backing that.
Thanks, Alex. Second, this question isn't directed towards anyone, and I'm going to try to synthesize several. There's a few people on the chat asking about native tribe involvement. Some kind of saying, why aren't you talking to native tribes? Others wondering if we are, were California tribes consulted when creating the framework, et cetera. So I'm not sure what information all of you have, but if there is any information on that, feel free to speak up. Yeah, thank you.
I can speak to that. So we have been discussing the project with the Climate Science Alliance and the Tribal Working Group. And we've taken tribes on a tour of the San Luis Rey River mouth. San Luis Rey River mouth is gonna be probably like a temporary dune area because we do have some constructs we need to get out of that river mouth so that that river can flow more freely. And so we are talking with the Tribal Working Group about how they like to get involved and discussing options for really like what kinds of things are are true to them that they would like to be involved with more, such as actual hands-on understanding of how dunes get restored, what kind of species are going to be planted there, and then what kinds of objectives do we have there. So yeah, we've been discussing this project and other projects on the Ray with the Tribal Working Group.
Yeah, and if I can jump in on that too, a project that we're working on right now in South Orange County, Surfrider, that is, we've hired on an Indigenous engagement consultant to help liaison between different tribal nations and Surfrider's own working group to both involve them as active stakeholders in our coalition calls and also provide greater touch points for other neighboring tribal groups. That is a kind of cool, well, back to funding. A lot of the funding sources for these projects require some sort of tribal engagement. And if anyone who asked that question has ever had the opportunity to work with any tribal groups before, you have to consult early before being able to, get anything to really work with a tribal nation, because one, capacity can be a big issue, and also just making sure that you give enough time for folks to be able to wrap their head around what a project is, consult, add input. So I think that that's kind of a really neat natural buffer that's added for a lot of these funding sources that you require consult with a tribe, and that can't just be surface level often. So a lot of these projects you see coming out have inherently had that tribal consult.
Awesome. Just as a reminder, I did say this was a 1 hour. It's already 6:58. So we're okay to stay on a little late to answer some of these questions because they keep coming in. So we'll stay another 10 minutes or so, but I know that some of you may have to leave and that's okay. This is being recorded, so we'll share this as well. So next question I see on the chat is, what are the names of the native plants? That's probably a lot, but.
Pop quiz. So I can chime in with the ones that are at Ponto. We have Abronia marittima, which is beach sand verbena or red sand verbena. We have a plant whose scientific name I always butcher, so I'll just say beach evening primrose, which is the yellow flowers. We also have a cool one called a coast woolly head, which is kind of this neat, smaller plant that spreads out on the sand in a really cool way. And we might have some beach burr coming in as well, some ambrosia. So those are the 4 main plants that we're working with.
All right, we got a question from Jim, who I think we used one of your photos, Jim, for the La Jolla flooding, but are there volunteer opportunities for dune plot projects? I'll leave that one open. I know we're working on some in the chapter, but it's not quite there yet.
I received this question in the chat as well. We have not established a volunteer program at Ponto, but I would love to do so. There is some maintenance that's needed. So we could definitely look into establishing some volunteer opportunities. There are also some invasive plants on the beach that we should be getting rid of. So I would love to explore that. At state parks, we often are just limited by our staff capacity. So if anyone out there wants to create this volunteer opportunity, I would encourage you to reach out to me. I'd love to work with a group or individual to make something happen.
Yeah, just speak to that a little bit more broadly. The Surfers Point project, for example, once those plants were planted, huge opportunity with the Surfrider chapter there to go in and remove invasives. We've got a project up at Trestles right now, which is technically San Diego County, although it is broken up by a very long line of traffic to get through Pendleton. But every 3rd Saturday, the South Orange County chapter is conducting dune restorations there. And not to take away from Surfrider, but I believe the city of San Diego offers restoration opportunities at Smiley Lagoon fairly regularly. So there's definitely lots of ways to get involved if you really, really want to go pull on some plants.
Or plant new ones, right?
Carrie was helping me create this list too, but I think in terms of just beach restoration as well, there's opportunities at Torrey Pines, Silverstein, and Tijuana River National Estuary right now, if you're looking for a weekly volunteer opportunity. I think a lot of them focus more on weeding and maintaining the beach, but that's also super important. I believe the Tijuana River National Estuary one is a habitat restoration day on Fridays.
All right, we've got a question from David. I can probably answer this one, but feel free to chime in. Well, Jayme, you know Encinitas well too, being someone who used to work there. I'm curious about the restoration of Beacons Beach in Leucadia. It's had a few landslides and they just redid the parking lot. But with a cliff like that, would dunes help in any way?
Yeah, dunes in general need more sandy beaches, and so wider beaches, and all of the beaches in Encinitas are pretty much bluff backed and narrow, except for where you see the Cardiff Living Shoreline, which was dunes and is clearly not bluff backed. But yeah, there was some we tried to do a couple things down there to lessen the wave attack at the toe of the slope at Beacons, and do some light dune restoration, but it really doesn't help too much, especially with that kind of historic landslide. That's not really going to hold it back, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Question for Sherry. This is probably directed towards you, Jayme. Will the dunes at North Harbor Beach be as tall as the dunes at Seaside? And then she rephrased it, I should say, is it projected that the dunes at North Harbor Beach will be similar in height and bulk as the dunes at Seaside? Seaside being the Cardiff Living Shorelines.
So the Cardiff Living Shoreline dunes are completely different than the dunes that we're going to be doing at Harbor Beach. So no, they won't be that size. The dunes that were constructed at Cardiff and at Seaside, those are really for protecting the road. Beneath those dunes is a 30-foot trench with a buried revetment, so like really well constructed revetment. And then a layer of cobble on top of that revetment, and then a layer of sand, and then many planted species and irrigation. They're a whole different ball game. That project was about $3.4 million versus the project that's at Harbor Beach, North Strand, and San Luis Rey is going to be about $75,000 in total. And there's no construction of them. They're just going to build themselves after we put the fence in. So they're not expected to get that tall, and they're not expected to withstand a super high wave energy event. They would just be there for lower wave energy events, and then we'd reconstruct them if they got totaled. But they're way cheaper to construct than the Cardiff ones, for sure.
Awesome. Got a couple questions from Bob. He's got compliments for everyone on the presentations, and then so I'll just kind of try to paraphrase here. Question one is, to implement dunes, do you need a back beach to begin with? I think the answer to that is yes. But yeah. And then question two, what is the annual maintenance / nourishment requirement / cost for a dune project? And I'm going to assume that might vary based on what you just said, Jayme.
I was going to jump in there and say every project is so different. You have passive dune projects like Jayme's talking about, where your cost is a little bit of sand fencing and some wood slats. And then you have major multi-million-dollar projects that either in Surfer's Point don't require maintenance, or in Cardiff's example does require maintenance. So it's really lemons to baseballs to elephants to soda pecans. They're all so incredibly different and so site specific that there's no real way to wrap them up in one nice bow.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the harbor dunes, Jayme, there won't be any nourishment. It's just going to use existing sand. But then for the Cardiff Living Shorelines, there is some sand bypassing from the San Elijo Lagoon mouth that helps to replenish them. So a little different for project. But his last question is, in urban areas like Oceanside, is public access compatible with shoreline bird habitat?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just kind of like Jenna was saying, there's dunes all over California now. Dunes being restored all throughout LA County. LA County just put out a coastal management plan that showcases dunes at Zuma Beach, at Santa Monica Beach. These are all very busy beaches. And in general, what it does is it provides another type of recreation. It may not be volleyball, but you have an opportunity then to take a look at a plaque and read about it, look at some different flowering species, look for your legless lizards that are often found in our Southern California dunes, and perhaps do some bird watching. And then, like I said, they're actually a sand storage. So as soon as those high tides and high wave events look at those dunes, that sand just kind of gets spread about the beach instead of getting completely taken offshore and off into a canyon. And so that's the whole point of them.
Yeah, excellent points, Jayme. And then one thing I would add is that, folks tend to hang out on the beach closest to the water, and the dunes are kind of on the other end of the beach. So there isn't too much overlap that we've seen, at least at Ponto, where folks still have plenty of towel space in front of the dune plots.
Awesome. All right, we've got a couple more, and then we're going to try to wrap it up in about 3 minutes. We've got a question from Amy, newly elected city council member Amy Stewart in Coronado. Do these projects require Coastal Commission approval? Coronado's South Beach and Strand are really irrelevant.
Yes, they do. For Ponto, we were able to get a coastal development permit waiver, which is an expedited process for projects that don't have negative impacts to coastal resources. So Coastal Commission staff are, really encouraging of these types of projects, and they want to see more of them. So they worked with us to really try to expedite it using the tools available to them. Cardiff Living Shoreline, as Jayme mentioned, is a much more complicated beast. It had a revetment underneath, so that required the normal coastal development permit process.
Okay, we're gonna do just a couple more here. This one I'll leave open to everyone. Are Trump's budget cuts threatening your work?
That's an easy answer for me because Ponto depended almost completely on federal funding from the coastal program with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. When we had state budget cuts last year, my sea level rise program was severely impacted because things had to be redirected by the Newsom administration. So we really relied on our federal colleagues to step in and provide that funding. So that's one way that we benefit from federal funding. Of course, I don't know how the next administration will play out, but we have been given some clues as to where federal funding for these projects might go. So luckily, we do have Prop 4 in the works. So yeah, it's really exciting. California voters approved of a climate bond for state agencies and other agencies to implement coastal or all sorts of climate adaptation, including coastal projects. So now the state will be able to step in with the funding. So we're really happy that that's in the works. So thank you, voters, for that.
Awesome. Got a question from Vivian, and then maybe just one more quick one after that. What do you expect to happen with the miles of cobbles that have arrived from the ocean to South Carlsbad beaches? We might have to do a whole nother webinar on these cobbles because there's a lot of questions, but there you go. We got it.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions and unfortunately just not many satisfying answers. Despite what feels like a popular opinion, State Parks does not put the cobbles there. We don't manipulate the cobble. It's naturally there. It's a natural process. We are working with Scripps actually, or Scripps is taking on a research project to kind of to look and excavate the cobble berm at Ponto. So just to get a better idea of how much sand is in there versus cobble. So we're really, in my opinion, just starting to understand the dynamics of cobble and how it works its way along our beaches. We're lucky to have Scripps as partners to explore that with us. But unfortunately, I just don't have an answer today, unless someone on the call here does.
It's a big mystery. It seems that as there's less sand in the system, cobble starts to show up. But I think it comes from the same places as the sand does traditionally, from rivers and then from decomposition of the bluffs and stuff. But yeah, we'll have to do a future webinar on cobbles and get Scripps to talk about their little GPS trackers that they put on cobbles and they disappear for 3 years and come back. It's pretty interesting. All right, we're about wrapped up. Final question. I think this one's for you, Jayme, from Sherry. Just some concern about what can be done or what will be done to keep dogs off the dunes and off the beach, especially North Jetty and the SLR, San Luis Red River mouth, because that's always been a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So we expect that bringing a little more attention to San Luis Rey with the Dune project, we're going to be discussing all these things internally with OPD and with fire and trying to get them to also compromise on how they do operations down in the San Luis Rey River. And then with that, we're going to be bringing up, that the dog issue. It's a definite issue. It was an issue at Cardiff as well. But we do expect that the exclusionary fencing will keep some of that vehicular dog traffic out of there as well. So
awesome. All right, one more, and then I promise we're done. It's for you, Alex, from Carolyn. Curious about the phase 2 of the Ventura Living Shoreline and what that entails and what's going on there.
Yeah, so it is officially started. If you have Surfline, you can hop online and actually see some of that construction that's already happening. But and I am truly shamed by this. I don't know the deep details of that project. I'm assuming it is very much like the first phase, but yeah, I'm not a part of that project, even though I speak very much about it. That said, it's phase 2 of the same good phase 1. There's going to be some setback. There's going to be rebuilding of that entire Dune network. I would go to, actually, this is kind of an interesting one, but VenturaRiver.org, the campaign manager from Surfrider, who's been managing the Surfers Point project, has created this incredible repository blog of his own that details every single step that the project's gone through, and bigger, to the entire dam removal and entire watershed restoration. So if I don't know, that guy definitely does, Paul Jenkin.
Yeah, awesome. It sounds like it's part of a much bigger vision. In any case, thank you, everyone, our panelists. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. To the 57 of you who are still here at 7:15, you're troopers. This is being recorded. I will send a recording for everyone. And I'm going to try to compile some follow-up information and answers to additional questions we might not have been able to get to. I might not be able to send that out tomorrow, but by Monday, I'll give a follow-up for everyone who attended, everyone who signed up with the recording, and just additional information, especially some of those volunteer opportunities and other ways to get involved. So really appreciate everyone's time. So stoked on just the overwhelming amount of interest that we have here in San Diego County, that people who love the beach and want to learn more about it and protect it. So with that, good night, everyone, and thank you, and we will be in touch.
Bye.